Hello everyone and welcome to the ADA Accommodations Service and Emotional Support Animal presentation.
Hi, I'm Judith Spain. I'm with the Georgia Independent College Association as the Compliance Collaborative Program Consultant.
And I'm Jennifer Wilson-Loggins, the Learning Center Director and Disability Service Provider for Brenau University.
This presentation, we're going to be focusing on service animals and emotional support animals and understanding what the disability and discrimination laws provide. We want to understand the differences between service animals and emotional support animals, and we want to review best practices and suggestions, as well as focusing specifically on Brenau University policies. So how do the disability services laws apply to higher education in reference to service and assistance emotional support animals? The American Disabilities Act of 1990 specifically deals with service animals. Titles 1, 2, and 3 provide protection and employment within public services and public accommodation and private entities. The law applies to all colleges and universities which employ individuals with disabilities, have public venues such as performances, or provide services such as education to the public. All of these titles also include the protection of the use of service animals used by employees, students, and visitors. The Housing and Urban Development enforces Title II when it applies to state or local public housing. The ADAA Act made significant changes to the definition of an individual with a disability. It broadened the definition, which resulted in more individuals qualifying with a disability and seeking reasonable accommodation. For example, an impairment that is episodic or in remission is a disability if it affects a major life activity when it is active. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 prohibits discrimination against an otherwise qualified individual with a disability solely because of that disability and any program or activity that receives federal financial assistance. It was amended under ADAA to include a broader definition of disability, and it's enforced by the Office of Civil Rights. We also have the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing based upon race, sex, religion, color, national origin, familial status, and disability. It prohibits refusal to make reasonable accommodation in rules, policies, when such accommodations may be necessary to afford a person with disability the equal opportunity to use and dwell in the residence. And this is jointly enforced by the Department of Housing and Urban Justice as well as the Department of Justice. So we now need to focus on what actually really is a service animal. A service animal, and this particular definition is in quotes because this is directly from the American Disabilities Act. It's a dog that's individually trained to do work or perform specific tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability, including physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or other mental disability. Now you'll notice on the picture here, you'll see a picture of a miniature horse. Yes, a miniature horse is possibly a service animal under Title I of ADA. However, Title I does not apply to Brenau University. So Brenau University does not need to accommodate a miniature horse. We would be accommodating a dog as a service animal. Why might somebody need a service animal? It could be a guide dog or a seeing eye dog. It could be a hearing or signal dog. It could be a dog that deals with sensory or social signals. It could be a seizure response dog. It could be a diabetes blood sugar alert dog, or it could be a psychiatric service dog. So there's many needs for specific animals, service animals. What type of services do they provide? Well, service animals can be trained to assist individuals with psychiatric disabilities or mental disorders. They can help alleviate symptoms of PTSD, anxiety, and panic disorders by physically taking an action to calm the owner. But they could be used to prevent disruptive or impulsive or destructive behaviors or interrupting inappropriate repetitive behavior with a persistent nudge. When a person with a dog enters into a public facility or place of public accommodation, the person cannot be asked the nature and extent of that person's individual disability. Specifically, only two questions may be asked. 1, is the animal required because of the disability? 2, what work or task has the animal been trained to perform? These are the specific only two questions that we can ask about service animals. And you'll see there the citation to the specific area in the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, frequently asked questions about service animals. Again, these are the only two questions you can ask in reference to a service animal. So what is an emotional support animal? It is different than a service animal. An emotional support animal is actually not defined under American Disability Act. And more specifically, the American Disability Act excludes emotional support animals. It is, however, defined by Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act, and further, it is defined by the Fair Housing Act. It could be any type of a dog. It is not limited to either a dog or miniature horse as defined under ADA. So it could be a snake, it could be a sugar glider, it could be any type of animal. It does not need individualized training, and it's generally therapeutic. It can provide comfort to one's physical, social, emotional, or cognitive state. And it can be restricted as to where access is granted. Specifically, it's granted only to housing. So an emotional support animal will be restricted to housing alone on a particular campus. To be more specific, and to quote specifically the law dealing with emotional support animals, it may be a certified service animal, or may be an emotional support animal, or any other animal that, quote, works, provides assistance, or performs tasks for the benefit of a person with disability, or provides emotional support that alleviates one or more identified symptoms or effects of a person's disability. Emotional support animals that do not qualify as a service animal under the ADA may nevertheless qualify as a reasonable accommodation under Section 504 and the Fair Housing Act. So when you're dealing with an emotional support animal or a service animal, what is really important? Training, and can I say more training? We need to know what the law says before we have a potential scenario occurring. If an individual who clearly has an obvious disability, for example, they are blind, and they walk into the facility with a seeing eye dog, remember there's only two questions you can ask? Those are the only two questions you can ask. That deals with a service animal. But an emotional support animal, faculty, you need to know that you do not need to allow an emotional support animal in your classroom. Indeed, you should not. Emotional support animals are restricted to housing alone, and Jennifer will talk more specifically about locations of housing at Brenau University. However, service animals must be allowed in the classroom and anywhere the person is allowed to be. Think of a service animal as the person. The person is the service animal is the person. They cannot be separated. They are intertwined. Consistency. When we talk about having a service animal or we talk about having an emotional support animal, remember, we're talking about an individual, a qualified individual with a disability. The person has gone through the disability determination process, and we have determined that a reasonable accommodation should be either a service animal or an emotional support animal. So we're using the same process to determine whether or not a person needs a service animal, an emotional support animal, the same process as if they would need extended time on tests or they would need some other reasonable accommodation. Clear protocols. We need to have clear protocols that clearly define the roles in this process. The Disability Services Office, the Learning Center needs to be specific in their roles. Faculty need to understand their roles, as well as residents' life.
And so specifically here at Brenau University, you may be wondering what policies exist. This is policy EVP CFO 113. Student handlers are encouraged to register their service animal with the Learning Center. Now, it is important to note that service animals, as Judy stated, are to be thought of as that person. They're intertwined. And so if a student is on campus for the first time for a tour or to move in, they do not necessarily have to register them with the Learning Center first. They're allowed, that service animal is allowed to be anywhere that person is, but we do encourage that person to then, in a timely manner, register the service animal. Faculty and staff handlers are encouraged to register their service animal with Human Resources. So if you, as faculty or staff, have your own service animal, then you're encouraged to register that animal with Human Resources. Appropriate documentation of the need for the service animal in connection with the particular disability may be requested if the need is not readily apparent. Like Judy said, if the person is clearly disabled and clearly needs the dog, then that is not asked or not required. In the case of a service dog in training, documentation establishing the partner or trainer's credentials from an accredited school for which the service animal is being raised must be presented. And handlers and partners must complete the service animal information acknowledgement form and submit the form to the appropriate office prior to the beginning of classes for the first term or session for which the handler or partner is enrolled. Forms and complete policy are available in ADP Resource Library under Company Policies. And then as far as emotional support animals, there is a different policy, and there's some additional policies that correlate. So you will see policy SS RL 742. Students must contact the Learning Center Director and the Director of Residence Life to request an ESA. This is very different from a service animal. You will not automatically be approved for an ESA. There are some forms and some documentation that are required. If you have an ESA on campus before you do this process, you may be asked to have that ESA removed until you do complete the proper process. So you will be provided with the policy and required forms as a student in order to take those to your mental health provider or your doctor to get those completed. When these forms are returned to the Learning Center, then they will be provided to the Disability Compliance Officer for final review and final approval. No ESA is permitted on campus prior to the student receiving approval from the Disability Compliance Officer. Students will be notified of this official approval by the Director of Residence Life and/or the Learning Center Director. The policy states several regulations regarding the care and handling of the animal, the health and immunization requirements of the animal, and other specifics. This is actually quite lengthy policy. If you would like to read the whole policy and review all of the forms, these are available in ADP in the Resource Library under Company Policies, Service Animal and Assistive Animals, and Residential Housing Policy. And there are quite a few references that Judy covered. And always feel free to reach out to myself at the Learning Center, and I'll provide you with additional information and guidance for the process. Any student who has questions about ESAs or service animals can also be directed to the Learning Center. Thank you so much for attending our presentation, and I hope that now you have a clear understanding about the differences regarding service versus ESA animals and know where to direct students who may present with either one.